And I'll begin, and we'll just admit people as they show up. Bruchim Habayim, welcome. On behalf of the Synagogue Council Board of Directors, it's my honor to welcome you to our program, Attracting and Engaging Millennials, Suburban Edition. This is the plan for our time together. I'll introduce our extraordinary panelists, and then we'll kick off the conversation with a question. If you have questions, please write them in the chat, and we'll try to get to them. We respectfully request that you remain muted throughout the program. Rav Chazan Aliza Berger was ordained by Hebrew College as both a cantor and a rabbi in the spring of 2017. She grew up in the Jewish renewal community of Boulder, Colorado, and dreamed of becoming a rabbi from a very young age. After graduating from Vanderbilt, Aliza spent a year in Israel, where she studied at Machon Pardes in Jerusalem with Rabbi Leora of Atzum Justice Works. While at Pardes, Aliza was a coordinator for the Egalitarian Minyan and served as a member of the Musicians Circle at Navatahila, the renewal community in Jerusalem, which draws Jews from all backgrounds to daven with music and kavanah. In Boston, she has served as a rabbinic intern at Temple Aliyah in Needham and Nahar Shalom in Jamaica Plain, and as high holiday cantorial soloist for Temple Israel in Boston and Anshe Amonim in the Berkshires. She's been serving at Temple Emanuel of Newton, first as a rabbinic intern and now as Rav Chazan since 2016. In 2019, both Rav Chazan Aliza and Rabbi Danny were recipients of CJP's High in the Hub Award for Jewish Leaders Under 40. Nice segue to Rabbi Danny Burkeman. He is the senior rabbi at Temple Shir Tikva. In his own words, he's committed to making Judaism relevant in the modern world, believing that it offers many answers to the major problems affecting society today. In his rabbinic work, he has looked for ways to engage people with their Judaism in new and creative ways. Rabbi Danny recently completed an Upstart Fellowship for Communal Intrapreneurs, and he was a member of the inaugural cohort of the UJA Federation of New York's Rabbinic Fellowship for Visionary Leaders. He's a regular contributor to the Metro West Daily News, E-Jewish Philanthropy, and the Union for Reform Judaism blog. For several years, he had a podcast, 2 Minutes of Torah, which was included in a list of top 7 Jewish podcasts. Rabbi Danny is married and has 2 children. While he prioritizes his family, he still finds opportunities to follow sports, pretty much all sports. Since moving here, he's adopted all of the Boston sports teams as his own. He's a big fan of the British TV series Doctor Who, and he would be happy to talk to you about it at length. Rabbi Leora Kling-Perkins is deeply committed to building and sustaining flourishing Jewish communities inspired by Jewish tradition. She strives to be a caring listener and a relationship builder who supports individuals of all ages in finding personally relevant ways to engage with Jewish observances, knowledge, and community. Originally from Needham, Massachusetts, Rabbi Kling-Perkins is a graduate of Brandeis University and earned rabbinic ordination and a master's in Jewish education from the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. While in rabbinical school, she interned at the Salman Schechter School of Manhattan and Camp Ramah in the Berkshires, several synagogues, the Center for Small Town Jewish Life in Maine, and a hospice in the Bronx. During her JTS year in Israel, she was a Trua Israel Fellow. Before becoming a rabbi, she was a fellow with Join for Justice, a national organization dedicated to training, supporting, and connecting Jewish organizers in their communities. And she spent several years working as a program coordinator for the Greater Boston Jewish Coalition for Literacy. She is married to Matthew Goldstone and enjoys cooking local vegetarian food, hiking, crocheting, swimming, listening to podcasts, and learning how to garden. So that is our panel. And I thank you so much for joining us this evening. Can't wait to learn from you. And I'll jump in with a question, and that is, when we talk about millennials, who are we talking about? Or who are you talking about?
I'll jump in.
Thank you.
It's an interesting question. I think that the conversation about engaging millennials so often for synagogues comes out in terms of we want to make sure that our future is secure. And we recognize that there's a pipeline. In order to get young families, you need to have millennials, and then they'll transition into the next stage and the next stage and the next stage, and that's our pipeline for success. And in that viewpoint, right, millennials are often 20s and 30s. It's interesting for me, like, who are millennials? I think in our yearning for having more young people, we often forget who they are and what they want. And so it's really important as synagogue communities to think about, first of all, what is your community like? What do you have uniquely to offer? And who can you attract? There's a group of millennials that is so overlooked. I think in Boston there are something like 78 organizations that are looking to engage young adults in their 20s and 30s. And there are, I think, 2 that are doing work in 30s and 40s and 50s, and those its programming is sparse and far between. Those are also millennials sometimes, and important for synagogues to think about. Who are the people that you're not yet engaging? That would be my definition of millennials. Who are the people that have slipped through the cracks thus far?
Thank you. Rabbi Kling-Perkins.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in too. I think what Aliza said is really important to remember, that millennial and young adult is actually no longer exactly synonymous. I was talking to someone about this panel earlier today, and they said, what, are they still talking about millennials? Like, isn't Gen Z the group that you should really be talking about if you're talking about engaging young people? So I think it's important to remember, and I actually think that often the important categories are to think about, what are the different demographic groups that we're able to engage and support in our community? And I think part of the reason why people asked for this panel, after the really excellent panel that took place on engaging millennials that were of more urban synagogues, right? The reason they're asking is because actually there are certain groups of millennials, particularly singles, who don't tend to live in the suburbs. And that's okay, right? It's okay if we're not engaging a group of people who aren't here. I think the question is, who are the people who are here who we're not able to support their needs, and we're not able to engage in Jewish community, who might really appreciate and benefit from doing that? So I think it's important to think about, the young couples who maybe are starting to move out to the suburbs, or young families, that there are different groups of people who might be living in the suburbs and who might really appreciate being connected to a community if only they can find one that really meets their needs.
Thank you. Rabbi Danny, did you want to add?
Yeah, just to continue in that vein, when I made the switch from working at an urban synagogue to be working in a suburban synagogue, it was working with millennials. It just happened that these millennials had found partners and often had children that bit earlier than the millennials who were still in the city. And so when I think about millennials in our suburban context, as Rabbi Kling-Perkins and Rav Aliza Berger were saying, they're not the young adults. They're not necessarily the singles. They're not coming here, and that's fine. I think I'm completely on board with that. But it is about, how do we engage newly married couples who are moving to the suburbs? How do we engage new parents who have just had their first child or are starting a family in the suburbs? They are our millennials, and in many ways they are the kind of target audience that we need to find ways to engage with and connect with. And often it's not that different from what millennials in the urban centers are looking for, or the connections that they want to find. It's just that slight shift from being a single person or being a couple to being maybe married and having kids, and what that means in terms of time and availability and connection and all those other things, which I'm sure we'll get into throughout the conversation. But that's our millennial group. The quest to kind of engage young adults, as the group kind of previously was known in suburban synagogues, is I think largely a waste of time, because they're not here. And there are synagogues in the urban centers that can serve them beautifully. And in many ways, as was mentioned, they're over-programmed in some ways by people who want to tap into that group. And young families needs to be where we focus.
So it sounds like our focus is indeed young families. What are your strategies for finding and attracting them. Go ahead.
I say, at Emunah, I would say I think of it as being two groups in particular. One group is families with young kids, and I think it's important not to take for granted that those groups are going to want to join a synagogue. So we have a preschool. Not all of those families are members of our synagogue, and we rabbis really engage in the preschool. We go sing at Shabbat, several times a month. We join them for holidays. We do programming with the preschool. We build relationships with the kids and with the families, and we invite them, right? We actually, through our preschool, we invite those families to things that are more related to our synagogue programming. We invite them to Talk Shabbat. We invite them to young family gatherings, and we really try and build a bridge. We're lucky to have a preschool. Preschools are really helpful if you want to engage families with young kids, but it's not actually enough to just have that. I would say the other main group is folks who don't have kids. And for us, I'd imagine this might be similar for you guys too, and especially at Temple Emanuel, we have a lot of our young unmarried couples are people who are engaged in the conversion process, where sometimes even they might be coming from places that are more urban, but don't necessarily have a synagogue that they can connect to, right? People might come to us from Cambridge because in Cambridge, there's great young adult, communities, but to come to a synagogue with a rabbi, they actually come to us in Lexington. And we work to create basically a chavurah of those families so that they can really be connected socially as well as through whatever synagogue programming is going on.
Did either of you want to address that question?
Sure. So, it's interesting. I feel like in some ways, Temple Emanuel, we sort of straddle the line. We are both suburban and a little bit urban. We are definitely within striking distance of Boston, and 50% of our young adults do come to us from Boston, but also 50% come from surrounding areas. When we were thinking about building young adult community, what I did initially was just trying to get as many coffee dates as possible. So I sent out a mass email to our entire congregation and asked parents to turn in their kids, to give me their phone numbers, their emails. I wanted to have coffee dates, and had, I think, 70 coffee dates in that first month. And out of that, we put together a Shabbat dinner. And so the initial energy was not about like putting together a program. It was about seeing each person. I went out to coffee with, I don't even know how many people in that first year. I was doing coffee dates all the time, and I was asking young adults, tell me about you. What's your story? What do you dream about? If you could imagine your ideal Jewish space, what would that look like? And then the invitation was, come build it with me. We want to create that. And out of that, we have Yesod, which is our 20s and 30s group. And it has about 600 people on our mailing list, and about 200 who we see multiple times per year. A lot of people come for just like the one time per year, but that's great. We're happy to see them. And we also have Gesher, which is our 30s and 40s group. And all of that still is really on the basis of co-creative community, that we have young adults come for creative teams where we get to think together about what we want to do. And we ask the young adults to help create those spaces. That it's not just something that we're making for you. It's not just something you show up for, but it's something that we can all work on together. So I think those are really helpful strategies. I also, if you're a synagogue that you want to be attracting young adults, I feel like I'm always on the lookout. Like, who do I see? Who's on the periphery who wants to be coming in? How do I connect with them? How do I bring them in and introduce them to people? And that's, I think, one other piece, which is it's a lot easier to get young adults when you have young adults. It's a little bit of a catch-22, but most young adults want to be in a community where they see peers. They're delighted to be an intergenerational community, but in order to get young adults, you have to build a young adult community. You have to have them come and know they're going to see somebody that they can really connect to. And so sometimes that takes pre-planning, that before Shabbat, if you know a young adult is coming, you need to call up and make sure you've got some other young adults to be there to welcome them.
Thank you. Rabbi Danny, did you want to add to that conversation?
I think the only thing I'd add, I think, is which I think we're hearing, is that we can't expect these people to necessarily immediately want to fit into our synagogue models and our synagogue structures. So to think that immediately we're talking about membership, join the synagogue, that's not the right conversation to be having with people in the first stage, because membership is a real commitment and there's a financial dimension and all these other elements of it. In the first instance, as I think we were hearing, it's about forming a connection. And it's both a connection with the synagogue in terms of maybe the clergy and the people who are there, but it's also the connection with one another. And I think that really what I see with a lot of the young families who make their way into our area that we're serving, they want to meet other people like them. That they've suddenly made the move into whether it's Wayland or Natick or Sudbury, and they don't know necessarily anyone else. They might know one other family or one other kind of peer that they're connected to somehow. And they want to just meet and see other people like them who are going to go through life at the same pace and same stages that they are, which I think is very similar to what all groups look for when they come to the synagogue. You want to see yourself in that synagogue community. And that can be more challenging because it's kind of how do you start there if you don't have that group. But I think that's part of what we need to kind of get away from, is this kind of immediately going with the membership model. Immediately you got to join. Actually, it's about offering this programming to find connection to both the synagogue specifically and to the Jewish community more widely. Not everyone's going to end up in the synagogue, but we can help them find those Jewish connections for themselves and then by extension for their families.
And are most of these programs taking place in the synagogue building or outside of the synagogue?
I mean, as I'm unmuted, I'll just jump in. But I think that pre-COVID, especially, it was really looking at different spaces. That the synagogue is not necessarily a space that everyone wants to come into and wants to be in. And it's about how do we take the programming to people to meet them where they're at and make it as easy as possible for them to connect. In our case, we serve several towns, and so it's about making sure that we're in each of those towns at different points to kind of build the kind of, whether it's the chavara within that setting or just kind of a peer group where they know people in their community as part of the larger whole community.
Rabbi Kling-Perkins, is it primarily within the Temple Emunah building or outside of the building?
Yeah, so I agree. COVID has really impacted that because, it's a lot harder to plan things in people's homes right now. But I agree that I agree that it's really important to offer options in different kinds of spaces. Even like some of our young family programming that we're doing over this summer, we're having some meetups in the synagogue playground and some in playgrounds across town, right? Both because of geographic proximity, that we really want people who live in different towns to be able to come easily. We have a similar situation to Shir Tikva that, we're also drawing people from a pretty wide geographic range, but also because we want to be in places that feel accessible to people. So I think pre-COVID, again, we thought of our kind of young couples group as really somewhat of a chavurah, and that was meeting in a combination of people's homes and in the synagogue space. Now it's a little more challenging, but I think ideally it's really helpful to do that. And by the way, it's not just millennials. I've seen in a lot of communities really a lot of success in having things in a bar, in an ice cream place, right? People like to get out and to interact with their peers and community members, but in a different kind of a space. And I think that's really helpful.
Rav Chazan, Aliza, would you like to respond to the space question? You're
Please
muted.
call me Aliza. And I totally agree. We do a mixture of programs. We used to pre-pandemic, we were also in people's homes. Now we're just in public spaces in Boston and public spaces in Newton. Actually, the pandemic has pushed us more towards the synagogue. And I think that the space doesn't matter so much. Accessibility matters a lot. It matters how easily people can get there, or how they perceive the ease of getting there. More than the ease of getting there, it matters who's going to be there when they arrive. And knowing that they're going to see at least 5 people that they like, knowing that they're going to be affirmed, knowing that they're going to leave feeling better. And and you've got a lot competing with your time, so you've got to make a compelling case for why they should leave their couch or leave whatever Zoom call they're doing or leave their friends and come join you.
What are the obstacles to entry?
Oh, everything. I mean, like, literally your phone is pinging with every single moment. You've got friends reaching out, you've got exhaustion, you've got workouts, you've got, I mean, work. Literally everything is competing, and most people in the world, I mean, everyone who's on this call, I'm guessing you're deeply passionate about your Jewish community, and that's a very central place in your life. Most of the young adults that at least I think about serving are not necessarily thinking like, gee, I would love to engage with the Jewish community. You know what's missing in my life? Shabbat. I really want to go to Shabbat morning services or Kiddush. I just love Kiddush. Like, no one is thinking that. So instead, our challenge is, how do you give them what they want until they want what you want to give? And so you want to think about like getting a compelling program that's gonna bring them into contact with other friends, that's gonna be meaningful. For us, we've done that by not imposing, right? By having young adults share with us what they authentically want. But even then, like the opportunity cost, we have a practice. Every event that we run, we send personalized emails afterwards that say, you know, and as program leaders, I say to every participant, hey, I love this conversation that I had with you about X. I really enjoyed being with you. You know, when you said that comment at the learning last night, I just really appreciated what you said. Every person gets an individualized message because we want to make sure nobody comes and feels like they weren't seen. I also send out messages to everybody that registered that didn't show. And one of the interesting things for me is that people pre-register, like people say, I'm gonna be there. And then a number of people will say like, oh, work came up or this came up or that came up. And it's just real, they want to be there, but life gets in the way.
I love the idea of emails to everybody and really acknowledging their participation or wishing they had been here there. So we're talking about overcoming the obstacles to entry. Any other suggestions about overcoming those obstacles, what they are and how those within our control, how do we overcome them?
I mean, I think I completely agree with Rabbi Aliza Berger. It's about the hierarchy of what they're looking for, I think. And I sometimes think about for the young families that we're engaging with, priority number one ends up being work. Then priority number two is their family. Then that's when we start to get to the optional slots that we can even think to slot into. And often number three is something around exercise and their personal well-being. And so really we're competing for number four at the best. And I think what we have to think about, which is I think what we're hearing, we have to think about what do they want, not what we want to give them. And I do think one of the things that we're very clear on is trying to repackage elements of Judaism so that it speaks to what they need and that they can find the connection to. Because I think they're often sometimes also intimidated about coming into Jewish spaces because who knows what kind of religious school or Hebrew school experience they had in their childhood that has meant that they have whatever preconceptions about coming into the synagogue. The number of people who we hear saying, oh, my religious school experience was nothing like this. I wish I'd had this when I was younger, and so on and so forth. It's a real thing that I think we've dealt with and we're tackling now, but they carry with those kind of memories. And so I mean, I think for me, for example, Shabbat as the idea of them taking a day of rest or taking time away from the screen or just pausing or having a family meal or something, they can connect to that more easily than the idea of taking 25 hours, not working, praying 4 times during the course of the day, and so on and so forth. And so it's about how can we package things that speak to what they're looking for, and then that brings them in. And I think I love that idea of it's what they want before we can give them what we want to give. And I think that's what it's all about.
So what have you discovered that they want? And I'm asking the team, not focusing on any one person. What are you hearing from them?
Not Judaism. They don't really want Judaism. They don't really want ritual. They don't really. I mean, I know that everybody here wants actually a different answer. You want me to say they want Jewish community and Shabbos and rabbis and all of that, but I think for most people in the world are just wanting to be seen and wanting to be known. They want to matter. And that matters so much more than whatever program you're going to do, and it matters more than the learning. And I feel like what we do is often like social community as a gateway drug to Jewish community. That it's, we want you to come in for the drinks and for the hangout, and then we're hoping that you're going to like it enough that when I say that we're doing Devar in the Garden and we're learning about LGBTQ rabbis in the Talmud, like, then you'll come for the learning even though you wouldn't have chosen that on your own. But that's a much smaller program than just like Boozy Bonfire. I'm telling you, like, Boozy Bonfire wins out every day. And I think that's okay.
Look, our Chabad neighbors have known this for decades.
Yeah,
Right?
I think connection is something that most people are looking for. And I do think, look, couples and young families are looking for it in a different way than singles are, right? A different way, a different degree, at different times in the week, right? But I think, that power of connection is so important, which, is why that's how we really try to lean into engaging those groups. Whenever anyone new joins our community, we try and match them with another family or someone else who, we think might have something in common with them, so they can start to build those connections. And, and that's particularly helpful for millennials. People want connection. Some of the things that are, kind of current, like 30s, 40s group has done have been game nights, because this happens to be a group of people who like playing board games, right? Just different ways to connect with each other.
I kept writing down the word connection on my pad, just in terms of, I think that definitely is the priority of what they're looking for. I will add two other things that we've seen a little bit of. Is one, I think that when they are young families, I think new parents want help being parents. Like, I think it's really intimidating. Suddenly you've got this baby or you've got this child, and how am I going to look after it? What am I going to do with my child? How can I entertain them during the day, on the weekends, and so on and so forth? And I think sometimes for the young families, it's through either their children or through supporting them as parents. And sometimes there is a Jewish dimension to it. The number of parents who kind of come and wanting to know, how do I make Hanukkah not all about the gifts and those kind of areas? So there are kind of entry points where they're looking for that. So I think that's one thing. The other thing I was going to say is they want it to be easy. They don't want to have to think about it, fuss about it, bring stuff with them. It's kind of ready-made, served on a plate to them, and they just show up, whatever that might be. And I think that can be from just know where to turn up for the social to the social action projects. I think there is an interest, I think, with this generation of engaging in issues that they care about. And again, I think that's another place where the synagogue can often be a place that we bring them together, give them the easy way to do an action, to get involved, and they appreciate that all being presented to them.
Thank
I
you.
want to just follow up on that, because there's a place that I'm holding an active question, because Rabbi Danny, I totally agree with you. Like, ease is very, very important in engaging this group. But there's a challenge that I see on the horizon, which is that millennials have been raised with the idea of birthright Judaism, with the idea that everything just comes to them. They don't need to invest. They don't need to do anything. And so we have a challenge in that, as we're trying to engage this group, I feel like on the one hand, the best way to get a large number of young adults engaged is to offer free, easy programming that there's zero requirement on their part to invest in. But for our Jewish future, if we want to have Jewish communities that are sustained in the way that Jewish communities are sustained today, with membership fees and dues and program fees, we have a real problem in terms of how we both train young adults in terms of their philanthropic desire to support Jewish community and their investment in Jewish community, and also just get them in the door. And I don't, that's something that we struggle with all the time. How do you balance that? Something we're definitely in process with, but I would love to hear from both of you sort of how you think about money when it comes to millennials.
Great question.
I mean, I'm 100% in agreement. And I think that sometimes one of my frustrations is I think there's been an overinvestment in the urban, non-conventional Jewish engagement for this group, to such a degree that they can get everything they want handed to them for no cost. And then suddenly they come to the suburbs where the foundations and the institutions are just not investing in our synagogues in anywhere near the same kind of level that they do in the urban centers. And I think it's a real problem in the structure of the Jewish community in general, because you create this expectation, as Aliza was saying, around what you get and how you get it. And then suddenly they come to the suburbs and there's a different model completely. And we're the ones who have to pick up those pieces and then retrain in some ways about what communal involvement means. And I think the money piece is the hardest conversation, because this is not a generation that's got the same kind of idea of the investment in the wider community obligation to give and contribute and recognize that my money is helping another child go to the religious school and be engaged in our programming and so on and so forth. The question often is, well, what do I get for my membership? And that's one of the big challenges right now, I think, for synagogues, is how do we come up with the right membership structure that allows us to do what we want to be able to do, and that people are willing to pay for in that context. And this generation it's not clear which way it's going to go in yet, in terms of the willingness to pay and to contribute financially, especially with the expectation of so much free Judaism.
So I agree with both of you that I think this is a challenge. And also I think that often the challenge is not money, but it's actually commitment, right? It's the need to actually put myself in a box and say that this is the synagogue that I go to, right? To actually join as a member, I think, can be a bigger threshold to get over. We try and make it really easy to become a member. The first year is essentially free, and preschool families, I believe, can do that, or if they're joining when their kids are, in religious school, they can have a year before they really have to start paying in. And so I think it's often, the commitment that's really hard, right? I think this is a demographic that is not such a fan of being put in boxes and labels. And, that's what we're asking people to do when we ask them to join. So I think, we do try and make it kind of easy to come in the door and easy to get, to get financial support. But again, I don't think it's that, for most people, I don't think it's that they can't afford it. I think it's about, is this something I'm actually willing and ready to prioritize in my life? And so I think that over time, I think there's two main ways that people kind of overcome that. One is because the synagogue or the community has become really integral to them, right? And maybe they're the kind of person who takes on leadership roles, right? And we also have people who ultimately, right, they have a kid in the religious school, they have some reason why it's clear to them that they need to join. But I agree. I think it is a big challenge for the models that we're working with.
I love the concept of birthright Judaism. It feels so appropriate. My son, who is a member of this demographic, suggested that millennials, or this demographic, lives on a subscription basis where they can cancel at any time. He said, how do you interest them in joining or subscribing? And how do you get them to renew their memberships or prevent them from unsubscribing?
I don't think membership is the game here. I really don't. It's nice and comforting. It's great when you get to go to a board meeting and be like, guess what? We've doubled our young adult membership. But outside of that board meeting, it means nothing. Like, the young adults who are joining, what you want are people that authentically want to join, who are committed to being a part of the community and are really members. And so, Leora, you were talking about the first year free. We have a similar program. It's great in the sense that, like, people don't have to commit. They really don't have to pay anything. It's just like they can just join. It's terrible for our bookkeeping. People just join because they're not actually interested in joining. And then later on, we're trying to find them. Where did they go? Did they really want to be a member? What's going on? So I think that membership is the wrong idea. I think that, getting people to where they're regularly coming around, where you see them, matters so much more than membership. And then down the road, they'll want to be a member because they see the value of that. And you don't have to make, the best case is when somebody wants to do it on their own. If they're not interested, they're not interested.
So Sarah asks, if membership isn't a goal, how does your fee structure support the congregation?
So I'm happy. We are really intentional. We have a program-based young adult program. So young adults pay a ticket price and they see what they get. If you're coming for Boozy Bonfire, you're paying for your drinks. If you're coming for Shabbat dinner, you're paying for your dinner. It's a fee structure that people feel really good about. We break even. If you're asking us about like renting the space at Temple Emanuel security, we're definitely taking from the synagogue that we're not breaking even. But it feels like a good structure for us and one in which the synagogue is excited about investing in that next generation and bringing them in.
Nice. Do either of you want to add? So really, it's an investment in the Jewish future as opposed to looking for monetary return.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to remember what our goal is, right? Our goal is to help people live meaningful lives, right? Connect to Jewish community in a way that works for them, right? Connect to Jewish tradition in a way that is meaningful for them. So, if we keep that first, we're doing something right. And as has been said, obviously we do need to figure out a financial structure for the long term. I think we're figuring that out, but I do think that we need to remember that this isn't something that happens in a moment. We're cultivating these relationships long term.
I also think we're not, while of course we have assumptions about synagogue membership and joining, people do cancel whenever they choose to and can drop out in terms of the subscription kind of based model of it. I think for the millennials, one of the questions is about what does my membership cover if you get to that point of discussing with them, and wanting to kind of the breakdown of what bits do I really want to buy into, what do I really want to be paying for. But I think Aliza's and Leora are correct. It's not about membership in the first instance. This is an investment in the Jewish community for the future. And there are a lot of areas where we do this anyway as synagogues for different groups and for different cohorts. It's part of our kind of communal responsibility. I think what we need to, obviously the financial structure of synagogues as it stands today needs people to ultimately become members and needs people to ultimately contribute, unless we can find another model. And I'm not convinced that we yet know what the model is going to look like for when these millennials are the board members of the synagogue and the presidents of the synagogue, and how it's going to be run. I would guess that we'll be at a different financial model by then, and maybe a different kind of synagogue landscape as a result in terms of how we're functioning and what we're offering. But that's being written right now, and I don't know how that ends.
Early in our conversation, Leora, you mentioned that a number of these families were somewhere in the conversion process. One of our participants asked, how can we attract and engage the partners of other faith backgrounds? So I would assume from that question, maybe not yet in the conversion process.
Or maybe never, right? That's not the path that everyone who's married to someone who's Jewish is on. We also certainly have families and couples where someone's not Jewish. So I just want to point out that that's a very different question, right? If someone's involved in the conversion process, then that we're talking about what's going to be a Jewish couple, right? And often the person who's engaged in that process is actually more likely than your average millennial Jewish person to want to really get involved, because this is something that they're taking on and really immersing themselves in. So to take the other question, I'll say we've had plenty of non-Jewish partners who are members of the congregation and have gotten extremely involved in things that they're passionate about, because it's still their community, even though they're not Jewish. And so they may join our environmental justice committee or even our membership committee. We've had some, real engagement on there, because if they feel connected to the community, there are so many ways for them to really to benefit and to give. So I think, and frankly, we've been talking about what makes somebody invested in the community when they feel that they have something to offer. That's really a point at which someone is really feeling invested, and people, it's gratifying to feel needed and to feel that you're able to support the community. And that doesn't have to be restricted to people who are Jewish.
So it sounds like we return to an initial conversation. I think Aliza has put it really well when she said you have to find out what they want, right? And I think that Leora put it beautifully when she talked about what are they passionate about. So how do you go about discovering where those passions lie?
So I want to, I'm sorry, I'm going to divert from the question, because I also have this question for synagogues, which is, why do you want to engage millennials? And I think that's a really important prerequisite before you start this work. Is like, why? What's the reason? Because there are so many groups who are waiting to be discovered, who are yearning for programming, who want to be seen, and who would make incredible members of your community. And it feels to me like there's so much energy and attention on the group that least wants to be a part of your shul. And so it's an interesting, everybody wants them and they're like, no, thank you. I've got my Peloton app. I'm going to work out. I'm good. So who is it in your midst that really wants to be seen? My guess, and I know this is unpopular, I know I'm supposed to be here talking about millennials. I'm happy to talk about millennials, but my guess is that synagogues actually would do much better to identify groups who are really excited and authentically ready, and think about engaging the passions of those groups, and think about what are the programs that are going to bring in singles in their 40s and 50s and 60s. What are the programs that are going to bring in empty nesters? What are you doing for parents after their kids go to college and they're just bereft and walking around, they don't know what to do with themselves? What are you doing with people that are just retiring and figuring out their next life stages? All of these age groups, I feel like there's just such a focus on young people that we forget. And I don't actually know that, you can pour all of your energy and attention onto millennials. It may or may not actually contribute to your long-term success. I would bet that actually investing in older or other unseen populations might actually make your synagogue more successful in the long term, because as millennials age, we see this trend. People get more connected and excited to connect with the Jewish community. So I just have that active question, which is, why do this work? It's good to have a clear answer for that.
Great question. Do either of you want to answer Elisa's question?
I mean, I think this has been part of the in the almost in the ether of Jewish community, that you have to engage the young adults. You have to get the next generation, and it comes back to that kind of perception of we're on the brink. We're always on the brink. It's the ever dying people piece again. And so if we don't get the next generation now, then we're never going to get them. And actually, I think Eliza's correct that if they don't join necessarily when they're still in this kind of young adult, young family stage, that doesn't mean they're definitively not joining a synagogue. It might create different issues and different things down the line to connect them, but it's definitely not a done deal. And I think there are many underserved groups in the synagogue, and I think part of it is they're just not sexy in the same way for funders or foundations or for grants or for any of these organizations that are trying to encourage the work. People don't tend to want to invest in programming for people in their 60s. People do want to invest in programming for people in their 20s and 30s. And that's a question really more than just for us as clergy of synagogues. That's a question for foundations and central agencies in terms of where they where where they're putting their money and what they're doing with that in that way. In terms of thinking about the group, though, I mean, I think Aliza said it with, you got to just talk to them, like at the very beginning, just going out and talking to them and hearing what they want. And I think too often, one of the things we get synagogues talking about, so we have a great Torah study program, we have a wonderful minyan on Shabbat morning, and we have a great adult education on Wednesday evening. Why aren't the millennials coming? And that's, they're not interested in that. We're still trying to give them what we want to give, as opposed to what they tell us that they want, and what they tell us that they want with their feet and with their words. And I also do think that, for me, following the social media pages of the millennials that we're trying to engage with is so important, because that's where they tell you what they care about. That's where they tell you what they're doing with their disposable time. You can find all the information there. And then the question is, how can we engage with that kind of programming and that kind of content in our communal contexts that get them to kind of start some kind of connection with the synagogue?
So often you can also connect the dots back to Judaism, right? You save the planet and
Yeah, I would say I largely agree with what the two of you have said, that it's really important to respond to what people are actually looking for. And frankly, I spend the vast majority of my time working with other demographic groups, right, who really need what we have to offer and are really looking for something. I do think that there are people out there who are millennials who haven't quite managed to fit Judaism or community into their lives in ways that feel right for them yet, right? I think that there's a process that happens when people leave college, where suddenly the structures that were surrounding you are gone, and you need to pick the structures that work for you. And I think that part of what we see in our society at large actually is really a struggle to find that sense of connection. And, you know, back to that word again, and that it's not actually built into our lives in many ways. And that's one of the things that a congregation can provide. Look, there are also people who are missing some sort of sense of Shabbat ritual, etc. But whatever it is, sometimes people haven't actually figured out how to work that into their lives. And so to the extent that we can help them do that, I think that is meaningful. So I think there is a space for that, but I don't think that, you know, as you said, I don't think we should be inventing a need for people.
so from the holy to the mundane, there is an assumption that suburbs are at a disadvantage for attracting millennials because they tend not to live in the suburbs. So you're telling me actually they do? In any case, listen to the question. In your experience, will millennials travel in order to find activities of interest and warm and welcoming communities of faith? I don't mean go from here to New York. I mean go from Marlborough to Newton, or Concord to Wayland, or Concord to Lexington.
I want to jump. I just want to jump. And I think that Boston had this kind of myth about the urbanization of the Jewish community that I don't think was ever actually correct. I think it was just people moving to the suburbs maybe a little bit later, just a couple of years later, and suddenly it was this whole thing of the suburbs are dying and nothing's happening. And then we've had COVID, which has completely shifted the equation, where we're the future, I think, in many ways, of where people are moving and in much larger numbers again. And there's a whole kind of captive audience of millennials who've made the move to the suburbs in the last couple of years, who are there to be engaged. I think that they recognize quality programming in that respect. And so they'll travel for the right thing, and they'll travel for excellence. But I also think but I'm not sure that's what we should be doing and focusing on, because I actually think that what they really want, though, is the community that surrounds them. And I would much rather that the person in Lexington connects to the synagogue in Lexington than drives 30 minutes to the synagogue in Wayland, and similarly for Newton. And I think one of the things is this kind of which again, and it answers someone raised the question about what's going to happen to our synagogues if we don't have more young families. I think there's two things that I just want to say. One of them is this scarcity mentality, that there's not enough people, there are not enough people to go around. They're not going to be enough Jews to connect to our synagogues, and that's the problem. And actually, there are lots of people out there. We just got to find ways to connect with them and give them the reasons to connect to our Jewish communities. And I think that the other piece that we also have to just be honest about is that the synagogue landscape as it looks today is unlikely to be the same landscape in 10 years. It just is not sustainable in the way that it is, because certain places are just not getting the critical mass that's going to be necessary for the long-term survival of these communities. And I think it's interesting in those contexts. On the one hand, you can focus on how do we attract the young family so that we've got a future, or you focus on the people who are there to make sure that you're the best synagogue for the people that you're serving. And that might mean 20 years from now, it's a different model and something different is going to come in its place. But I'm not sure that's necessarily the right or wrong thing in terms of approaches.
I like your positive attitude. Emphasize the positive, eliminate the negative, right? Avoid the scarcity mentality and rather be the best synagogue for the people you actually are serving. And I also appreciate what Aliza had to say about there are lots of populations that are hungry for connection and to be served and are excited about Judaism. So don't ignore them.
Yeah, I also just want to say I'm loving this chat. I'm noticing in the chat a couple of comments about like, okay, what happens if we don't have any kids in our religious school, if we have to close our religious school down? And I want to really affirm Danny's point about when you're in a scarcity mindset, it makes you make different choices than when you're looking for abundance. So the market is saturated with religious schools and the market is saturated with young adult engagement. But what would happen if you turned your shul into a mecca for, like, I don't know, programming for 60s? Like, there's like zero competition. You could be the best synagogue that exists in the state of Massachusetts for 60-year-olds, and I'm telling you, people would come from everywhere. Like, people come for quality program, they come to be seen. And so it feels like, rather than being like, what will happen, oy vey, like, how are we going to exist? Thinking about, like, what are your unique strengths? Every community has its own unique strengths. What do you do better than anyone else? What is it that you've got going on that people need to know about? And it could be programming for this age group. It could be Shabbat dinners. It could be, we're really good at learning this, like, really obscure Chassidut. We're really good at learning Mishnah. Like, Mishnah, we just bring Mishnah alive. Whatever is your thing. I think really investing in that and investing in, as Danny said, the people you have, the community that you have, and doubling down on that is likely going to just bring so much vibrancy to a community. And if you're struggling to just hold on for the sake of the future, that doesn't give you a lot of strength in the present.
I totally agree about rejecting the scarcity mindset. And, I want to add to the comment about when people move from our community to Sharon or Newton or Framingham, we connect them with a synagogue in their new neighborhood, right? We want them to find meaningful Jewish community where they are. That's not a loss to us, right? It's a wonderful thing for the Jewish community that, that these people are going to be able to be hopefully contributing, community members in that new place. So we're happy to do that. You ask about people driving, someone's not going to drive from Boston to Lexington for a program, but they might drive from Lowell. So, I think the question is, sometimes when people move into areas where that are more suburban, that are further out, they're kind of signing up for the drive. And so I think we need to be realistic about who we're trying to support, right? We're trying to support the people who are in our geographic range, which is going to be kind of further out from the city and not necessarily closer in most cases. And so, that goes also for the demographics we're going for, and for just even the locations of where we're hoping to draw people from.
Thank you. I want to give each of you an opportunity to share closing thoughts about attracting and engaging millennials, or anything else you'd like to share with this group of people who are here tonight to learn with us about being better purveyors of Judaism, I think. Would somebody like to begin?
I'll jump in. I grew up in Boulder, Colorado with Reb Zalman Schachter Shalom Aleichem Shalom, and he used to talk about how through all the persecutions the Jewish community has experienced, our ancestors like froze the nutrients that we needed into like freeze-dried Judaism, like MREs. And we're all just sort of living off of these MREs. And this feels like the moment to get back into the kitchen and to start cooking again, and to think about the fresh ingredients that are relevant in people's lives today, to think about what's organically happening in our communities that's relevant to people's lives, and to be crafting new meaningful traditions. And that it's scary because it requires all of us. We can't just get out the packages that have already been prepared. We can't just keep doing things the way we've always done them. We have to get creative, but the opportunity is delicious and a wonderful opportunity to co-create a meal that we'll all enjoy together.
Love that metaphor. Thank you, Aliza. Rabbi Danny, was there any, do you have final thoughts?
I mean, I say amen to what Aliza said. I think she's right. And I think for us, we have to break away from the models. I think that the models might have served us really well up to this point, but especially as we emerge from COVID, which I think has accelerated a whole load of processes that were already taking place. What synagogue life looks like in the future is going to be different than what it looked like 3 years ago. And we have to be okay with that if we're going to want to build synagogues for the future. And if we're not okay with that, that's also fine. But then let's in those contexts, double down on what you're doing. And that's great. And recognize, as I think has been said, who you're serving and how you're serving. And that'll be great for those people who want that. But I think it's a really, really exciting time to reimagine what the Jewish community is going to look like in the future. And I'm excited to be doing the work and to have wonderful colleagues like these on the screen who are also engaged in this right now. I think it's wonderful for the Jewish community as a whole, and specifically for us in the greater Boston area.
Thank you. Rabbi Leora.
Yes, yes to what both of you said. And I love that MRE kind of metaphor there. Look, Jewish tradition is so powerful and has been so lasting because it's lived, right? It's about how we live our lives. And it's about the ways that Judaism enhances our lives and becomes part of the fabric of our lives. And so, if we're able to find ways that Judaism is meaningful in just some piece of somebody's life, that is, then we're doing something right. So whether it's, that moment of coming together as a family for a holiday or for Shabbat, right? Whatever it is that really feels that we can integrate it into our lives in a way that feels meaningful and that makes our lives a little bit more sacred, then we're really accessing something so true about our tradition.
Beautiful. What a lovely way to end. Thank you both. Thank you all so very much. We're abundantly grateful to Rabbis Aliza Berger, Danny Burkeman, and Leora Kling-Perkins for sharing their experience, insights, and wisdom. Thank you to each of you for the gifts of your time and for all that you do for your congregations. Our programs are listed on the homepage of our website, www.synodecouncil.org. Next week, there will be a strategic planning workshop, a session on strategies for energy cost reductions, and an update especially for synagogues from the ADL. The following week, you could choose to join us for a virtual tour of J-Art's culture website. You could learn about attracting and engaging millennials with the profoundly successful and resourceful Jewish Grandparents Network. We do look forward to seeing you soon, and we wish you good health. Laila Tov. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Where?
thank you all. This was great. Really,
Thank
really
you.
appreciated hearing from you both. It was really wonderful.
This was lovely.
You all were amazing.
Such a joy to hang out. Thanks so much for organizing and including us.
Thank you for being organized and included. Look forward to seeing you all again soon.
See you soon.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
So much.
Good night.
Bye, Lato.
Be well. Laila Tov.